Every week I meet with my friend from Valencia on a Google Meets video call, and we do what's called a language exchange. So we speak Swedish for a half an hour. She just moved to Sweden this year, and I'm trying to improve my Spanish, and it's really tough to learn a foreign language when you're not actually in a place that speaks that language. So we have this as a way for me to try to keep up with my Spanish, and we have Spanish conversation practice for a half an hour after that. But what's really interesting for me is to hear her experiences because she moved, to Sweden from Spain. She's with a Swedish boyfriend who's now studying. And it's very, very interesting because my story was very, very similar. When I first moved to Sweden, was together with a Swedish girl who was studying in a smaller Swedish town outside of Stockholm. So there were a lot of similarities, and it makes me reflect a lot on my experiences since I moved here. Because now I've been here for so long, it seems like it was a long time ago that everything was so new for me. So it's really interesting for me to hear their perspectives. And one of the things that we talked about in our most recent conversation was how it can be a little bit tough to make friends in Sweden compared to our home countries. And it got me thinking, and I told her about something that I had read about in this book that I read called Sex Before Coffee. It is basically a book about dating in Scandinavia, written by my friends that run the YouTube channel Dating Beyond Borders. Great book, I definitely recommend it. I'll actually link it down below. But what's really interesting is because the dating culture is so unique and different in Scandinavia compared to the rest of the world. This entire book goes into detail about why it's such a weird and strange dating culture from their perspective when they've looked at all the dating cultures around the world. But one of the things that it talks about in this book is that Swedish people, they love to have their social circles, and they don't necessarily break out of those social circles as much as people do in other countries. So for example, they will have their high school friends that they went to high school with or grew up with. They will have their college friends that they enter into a college program with and do their things with their college friends. They'll have their work friends, their job friends. They'll have their people that they play a sport with or do some sort of recreational activity with. And they don't tend to mix and match their friend groups. So it's like, I have time for these friends, I have time for these friends, I have time for these friends, but they never invite people from their floorball team to come hang out with their work friends. It just doesn't really happen. Whereas like what I noticed, because I spent 3 months in Spain last year, is that it is really different there. They just kind of mix and match, and everybody is inviting everybody everywhere. And if you have two friends that don't necessarily know each other, they'll just invite them both, and it's not a big deal. But because Swedish people compartmentalize their social interactions, it doesn't happen as much that you're mixing and matching and meeting new people as easily here as you would in other countries. And I also associate this a lot with dating. It's not very often for people to make cold approaches on the street or approach people because they don't have this same sort of small talk that we have in like the US or in Spain. So when it comes to dating, it's like there's a time and a place for dating. So like people will really heavily rely on dating apps on their phones because that's sort of the appropriate place to be looking for a partner. Or if you're at a bar or a party, that is like an appropriate place. But if you go flirt with somebody on the street, they're going to be like, what are you doing? This isn't like the right place to flirt with somebody. I guess if you're not from Sweden, they might give you a free pass, and you can kind of use this to your advantage because they're like, oh, it's not their culture. They don't understand how we do things here in Sweden. But I guess if you're like a Swedish guy and you go up to a Swedish girl on the street, they might be having their guard up a little bit because they're like, why, this is weird. We don't really go out of our little bubbles, especially when you're going about your day. But what was really interesting to me is that we've both come across Swedish people say things like, I don't need to have new friends. I barely have enough time for my current friends. I already have enough friends. That to me as an American is sort of crazy that you'd be closed off to new friendships. But in some ways it sort of makes sense in this culture in Sweden, because if you have a lot of friends, they want to make sure they have time for all of their friends that they do have. And if they start to add more people to the mix, because they don't mix and match their friend groups together like we do in other countries, there's just not enough days in the week to hang out with all these people. If you have a ton of different friends and a ton of different groups and you're not just mixing them together, it's much more difficult. But for me, I feel like one of the reasons why I'm more open to new social connections and things is because I'm really not afraid to just mix different people together. For example, maybe I have one friend that wants to hang out on a Thursday that I met through a friend of a friend or met at a party, and then another person that I like to take pictures with or whatever, and they also want to hang out and they have no idea who the other person is. I'm like, hey, I'm hanging out with somebody on Thursday, but maybe we can all go out together. For me, that's like a totally normal thing. And then these two people that didn't know each other meet each other through me. So I've had a lot of people say that I'm like a social connector in Sweden. And I never really thought about it, but like because Americans don't have these like compartmentalized friend groups, there's a lot of people that get to know each other through us because we don't have these sort of same barriers that they have in Sweden. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And I also noticed this because one of my friends had a birthday party not long ago, and I knew everybody at the birthday party except for one person. And the person that I didn't know came up to me and said, hey, it looks like everyone at this party knows each other because they knew you first. And I didn't really realize it, but I'm like, wow, actually you're right, because I knew this person and I knew this person and we'd all hung out with each other at different phases, and then it sort of developed friendships and lives of their own. So I never sort of viewed myself as a social connector, but I think that really goes to show how there is a cultural difference in those mindsets. Now, if you compare American culture to Spanish culture, because I have quite a few Spanish friends here in Stockholm as well, and the Spanish people, they take this concept to a whole different level. I mean, one of my friends, we had these pasta nights. Basically once a week we would have pasta, and everybody would take turns hosting and making a pasta for people in this group. And we started out with like 4 or 5 people, and then one night we had one of my friends from Spain come, and she's like, oh, I can host next week, I'm going to invite some more friends. And then we had this WhatsApp group where everybody would communicate, and then every week it would be more people added to the group, more people added to the group, because people are so open and welcoming, and it was a very international community. But by the end of it, it became this thing where like nobody wanted to host because there's like 20 people in this WhatsApp group chat, and like who can host a party in a tiny Stockholm apartment for 20 people? It's really interesting, but it really goes to show in that friend circle of all these very international, a lot of Southern European people, it was very, very easy to meet new people because people are so open and welcoming and inviting. But the thing I will say about Swedish people is that once you become friends with them, if you manage to break into their social circle, whether it's through a sports club, whether it's through work or whatever it is, they're really genuine and they're really awesome people. And that's been my experience. The Swedish friends that I do have, that I hang out with on a regular basis, I feel very, very lucky. And I can honestly say my best friends in the whole world are in Sweden. And it makes sense. I mean, I've lived here the entirety of my adult life, 5.5 years almost now. And that's not to say I have amazing friends in the US as well, but I would say the people that know me best now and have seen my life over the past 5 years are the closest Swedish people that I'm friends with. And I'm very, very thankful for that, and thankful that I've met so many awesome, amazing Swedish people. And that's one of the reasons why I've enjoyed staying in this country for so long.